Rockland Public Library patrons and all of our friends in Maine Library Land. I'm Shane.
And I'm Patty.
And we are here to celebrate Women's History Month by talking to you about some women that we find inspiring. And I'm going to start off with one of my favorite authors, Anne Tyler. Anne Tyler was considered kind of a giant of the literary world in the 1980s when she won the Pulitzer Prize for breathing lessons, and she was nominated for the National Book Award. She seemed to kind of fall a little bit out of favor in the 90s, although she still made the bestseller lists. And then she's had a real critical resurgence with her last two books, including Clock Dance from 2018. And Anne Tyler is a wonderful, quirky, very funny author who writes about characters who some people might describe them as boring, but they're really fascinating. They're amazing people. She writes about men and women. Clock Dance is a great example of her style. The main character is Willa, and she gets a phone call from a woman who has seen her name on the refrigerator at her friend's house, and she asks if Willa will fly across the country to take care of a little girl who is the daughter of a woman who used to date Willa's son. So Anne Tyler's characters get into these kind of outlandish situations. So Willa does take off across the country to watch this girl, and her life changes. It's a very inspiring story. Anne Tyler's writing is pristine, and I would recommend any of her books: The Accidental Tourist, Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, and certainly Breathing Lessons and Clock Dance. Over to you.
All right, so I am also going to talk about an author named Anne. There must be something in the water with authors named Anne. The author I'll talk about is Anne Lamott. I was introduced to Anne Lamott with her fictional works, and I love the fact that there's so much humanity and humor in them. In one or two pages, her books can both make you laugh and cry. Her characters are people who you feel like could be your neighbors and the people next door, or they could even be you. And I think that's why I connected to her a lot. In addition to her fiction, Anne Lamott has written many works of nonfiction. The first book that I read was Bird by Bird, in which she talks about her writing process. But then Grace Eventually, Thoughts on Faith, and other collections of essays that she has written in recent years. As I said, that she's funny, she speaks from the heart, and she tells the truth, and she makes you laugh, and she makes you cry, and she makes you feel. And that's Anne Lamott.
Believe it or not, we're talking about a third Anne, because the next person on my list is the poet Joan Sexton, who happens to be my favorite poet of all time. She was one of the confessional poets who came to fame in the 60s and early 70s alongside Sylvia Plath and W.D. Snodgrass and Theodore Roth, and she is amazing. She had themes in her poetry that had not really been explored up until that time. She was groundbreaking. She was a trendsetter. She also suffered from depression, but within her poems there was always an element of hope that I found, and I think she is underrated, oddly enough, and one of my greatest inspirations. She was remarkable.
All right. I'm not going to talk about somebody named Anne. I'm going to break the trend. I'm just going to talk about Dorothea Dix a little bit. Dorothea Dix, if you didn't know, is from Hamden, Maine. She lived from 1802 to 1887, and she was an advocate for the mentally ill. At a time when people who were mentally ill were thrown away, she helped create the first mental hospitals, and she lobbied the legislature and Congress for better treatment of the mentally ill. And it's incredible to me that a woman in the 1800s, stood up and fought kind of like male-dominated culture to advocate for people who were treated as animals and not as human beings. And it's amazing to me that she did that, and I think that what she did kind of still resonates today. And I think it's important that we still treat the mentally ill as human beings. So I thank her for what she did.
That was wonderful listening to that. And I would just like to say, before I move on, that you, Patty King, are a woman who inspires me every day of the week. It's true.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
we're moving on now to a little music with the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin, I first heard her as a kid when she was making a comeback in the 80s with Freeway of Love, which was a top 10 hit. But I knew that she was, that she had done so much more earlier on. But as a kid, I was only interested in her current top 40 singles. So later on in life, of course, I went back to discover the work of Aretha Franklin. And it was the first time that I became, I think, aware of what people mean when they call somebody a genius, because every element of her work seemed to come together, from her voice to the lyrics and the themes that she was getting across in the lyrics, with songs that really changed the whole world. In the late 60s, songs like Respect and Chain of Fools and Think. And then in the 70s, she continued to shine with songs like Rock Steady and Daydreaming. And in 2010, when Rolling Stone magazine did a list of the top 100 vocalists or singers of all time, Aretha Franklin was chosen as number one. And I can totally understand it. She was an amazing, important, very important person, the Queen of Soul.
So, Rachel Carson is the next person who I will talk about. And Rachel Carson lived from 1907 to 1964. She was a marine biologist, an author, and a conservationist. She is known for Silent Spring, which really made our misuse of pesticides in agriculture come to light. Many people fought her for these beliefs, which were truth. She was a scientist. She helped kind of found the global environmental movement. And the other thing that I appreciate about her is that she also helped us with books like The Sea Around Us, kind of appreciate the wonder and the beauty of the natural world and the living world, and helped us kind of think about why we should fight for the natural world. And so Rachel Carson, there you go.
These women are all inspiring, and we need inspiration right now. But we're going to talk about a couple of women from our real lives. So I want to say that my fourth person that I'm talking about was my high school English teacher, Suzanne Taylor, who really opened up the whole world of reading and writing to me. She was an inspiration to me every day of high school and got me through those years. And she really taught me the value of the written word. She introduced me to some of my favorite authors of all time, like Virginia Woolf and Zora Neale Hurston. And I learned everything that I know about writing from her. So Suzanne Taylor, who was my English teacher for several years in high school, has a big piece of my heart, and I'm happy to talk about her Women's History Month.
And I'm going to just touch upon these two fabulous women in this picture, my grandmother Martha Moore and my grandmother Hazel King. My grandmother Martha was a nurse. She was a public health nurse, and even after she retired, she continued to work in the nursing arena. I remember her into her 80s working at blood pressure clinics and helping people get shots and things like that. She did everything with a pleasant, quiet, sweet demeanor. You know, I also, just because she was my grandmother, she's inspirational to me. She kept a beautiful house. She made some of the best cookies in the world and the best jams and jellies in the world. And she just had a quiet grace and power about her. And my grandmother King, my grandfather died when I was 10 years old, and she was left a widow, and she remained single for the rest of her life. But one of the first things that she did after my grandfather died was she started to travel, and she took trips that she wanted to take. She went to Hawaii. She went to Branson, Missouri, because she loved country music. She kept on traveling, and she kept on going, and she volunteered at the senior center in Bath, Maine, and just kept going and doing what was important to her. I think that the other thing that I think both Shane and I want to say is that there are many women in our everyday lives that are inspirations, who are out there who don't have books written about them, but maybe they should, who are doing incredible things. So I think we're going to turn things over to you who are watching us and ask you to tell us, to share with us who is an inspirational woman in your life, either somebody who's famous or somebody who is not famous as in has had a book written about them, but is really special and has made a great impression on you.
And that made a big impression on me. Patty talking about her grandmothers, and there's nothing as special as a grandmother or a grandfather, so hold on to them and treasure them. And like Patty said, let us know what women inspire you daily or have made a huge impact on your life. And we are so thrilled that we were able to speak to you remotely today and celebrate Women's History Month. And we wish you all the best this weekend. Take good care.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.